Hey everybody out there, my name is Dragnix, and today I set my critical eye on a world of explosions, wingsuits, and third world conflicts in Just Cause 4. But before I begin this critical eye, this key was obtained from the publisher Square Enix for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? I feel like I have to start out this video with a visual analogy of where I think the series of Just Cause is at this point. And there is no better example than the clip you see before you. Now, in case you don't know what's going on in front of you, I am driving along the countryside here, moving forward like the series is attempting to do. But you may notice that one of the wheels, well, it's sort of fallen off. Sadly to say, that's Just Cause 4 in a nutshell. A solid set of concepts and gameplay from years past, but it's lost all momentum with some puzzling design decisions, along with the fact that the series has run into, well, let's say some technical problems. You probably heard that last point from other YouTubers, but I have to emphasize that the game does perform okay if you're willing to give up one particular caveat along the way. To begin with, unless you have a beast of a rig, you are not hitting 60 FPS at 4K resolution. With the specs that you see on screen here, I was only able to average 40 FPS in a test area at best. And this was in an area where the effects weren't necessarily going to be putting that much strain on the game. Now, what's interesting here is that regardless of most of the graphic settings that I attempted to change that you can see here, that 40 FPS really stayed constant for the most part. Sure, you'd get, 3 here, 4 there, but overall, when you combine them, you were still around the 45, 44 range. The only thing that really changed it was changing the resolution, and changing it to 1080p, I started seeing 100 to 130 FPS in the open world, depending on what was going around me. Now, be a little wary of that statement though, because there are drops down to even 70 FPS in very active areas. Locking it down to 60 would probably be the best for consistency, but for an older engine like this, you would hope that you could get a little bit more out of it, especially with the new hardware available. I mean, let's be honest here. Does this look like a game that should be locked to 60 FPS in 2018? No. But to be perfectly honest, a game not looking like the shiniest toy in the room usually doesn't bother me normally. Yes, I'm going to report it for you guys because some of you really like performance, and I do like it too. But if a game is a little bit back there in terms of its graphical fidelity, I don't really have a problem with it. Part of my issue with modern day gaming is the race to the top of the graphics pile and sacrificing, well, focus on gameplay, for example. But with that said, there are segments in Just Cause 4 that just look off. Like, okay, the cutscenes aren't exactly the greatest, and I feel like I'm watching a late-stage PS3 game. There's no sharpness to it. Everything is fuzzy, and there's not a lot of definition to it. But then there's things like this. Look at the hair here. It's all over the place, and it just looks like a really bad wig with this lady's hair. And I want to focus on this beard. I mean, is this purposeful? That his beard looks like it's been through the color tumble dryer? It's so unnatural, it's so off-putting, and it's something that I really don't want to keep looking at. Lighting in these scenes are just so absurd. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and it doesn't make a lot of sense when the lighting in-game, in-engine, seems to be fine. So why are the cutscenes so bad? In general, there is some pop in a distance in the gameplay sections, and there's some brush effects, especially with weedy parts of the game, that feel unnatural. But, frankly, a lot of this could be forgiven if the gameplay was able to hold up with past iterations of what the series has done. This is where Just Cause 4 shines a little bit more. but still not enough for me to give a recommendation in the end. The base gameplay here is the same as the other games in the series. You go through a series of territories that you need to take over in an overall war on an island nation. However, unlike some other games in the series, there's less emphasis on blowing things up in the little cul-de-sacs that would be present all over the island, although it is necessary in order to advance your armies. See, there's this chaos meter, and it's grown by destroying structures, killing the enemy Black Hand army, and, well, causing chaos, which you did in previous games. But I will admit, this time around, things are missing. In particular, there's a lack of explosions or a lack of buildings that you can tear down. They're scattered here and there, but I remember, especially in Just Cause 2, that they would be packed into one little place, and there would be a lot of them. Here, there's little ones here and there, but they're not that common. Which is sort of strange when you think about it. I mean, this game is about explosions. It's about going over the edge. I mean, Rico is this action star in this game. So why has the action been toned back in certain parts? Now, don't get me wrong. In the main quest line, and in particular the side quests, you do get those moments where, yeah, you feel like a badass. When you're being chased by a bunch of vehicles and you're having to use your hook shot, or I guess it's not a hook shot, it's a tether, but I keep on calling it a hook shot. But you use it to, make the cars go off the road or off cliffs or something like that. Those moments are exciting. The base controls and gunplay still works, and flying around from location to location using your tether and wingsuit can be fun in small bursts. I especially like it on larger bases. Now, I specifically said in terms of small bursts because in order to get around this huge map, you've got to use the drop system, aka drop yourself from a plane. But for these small bases, these medium bases, and in particular the large bases, trying to get from end to end using the wingsuit and using your tether is actually really fun, especially when you're dodging everything left and right. Now, while it may have been a while since I've played Just Cause 2 and 3, I feel like there was more emphasis on gunplay this time around, at least in the first 10 hours or so. The controls with the keyboard and mouse are at a good place. There's enough leeway for you to miss shots easily, but it rewards you for accuracy even at reasonable distances. While the grenades are a little bit hard to handle, many of the weapons feel good to use here, especially the rocket launcher. Nothing here feels off, and there are weapons that are better in other situations than others. Yes, sniper rifles at close range, they can work, but no, you really want an SMG. Okay, I lied. There is one thing that feels off. One major thing. That's the user interface and menu controls. Now, I don't try to be overdramatic in my criticism, but I have to sit here and wonder, who the hell designed the system? First of all, most menu options are specific to very specific keys for good reason in most games. M for map, for example. Tab for being a menu. For some reason in Just Cause 4, the base map is 1. The number 1. Most of the time it's the primary weapon key. Now look, there's some bindable keys here, and that does help so you can change it. But there's no options to go directly to submenus. I mean, it's not like there are options in the game that you'd want to bring up right away with one button press. Like weapon drops. Or supply drops. Or hell, the map in general. But this extends far beyond those menus. Let's talk about the tether system as a whole. Like previous games, your tether can do more than be a grappling hook. It actually has 3 different elements to it. It has a booster, which acts as a small rocket that can launch things forward. It acts as a retractor as it can pull 2 items together. And the newest one is an airlifter, which puts a balloon on the tethered item, allowing it to be lifted in the air. Now, they have different mods to them, and you can combine these items so that each tether has unique properties. But in order to change that, you have to go through one menu, then another menu, to get to another menu to choose the specific loadout you want, and then adjust it for low, medium, and high settings. This is way too complicated, especially if you want any sort of flow in your game. You know, the high action-packed game that you're trying to play, the last thing you want to do in the middle of a battle is take a minute to be like, oh, okay, I need the booster at a certain type of tether. So I'm just gonna stop battle, change these little things, and then get right back into it. And by get back into it, I mean 30 seconds later. It does not work. So here's my question to developers. Instead of giving us 3 loadout slots and being able to cycle through them via Z and C, why not use Z, X, and C to be able to alter and cycle through each of the individual parts of the tether? One being the airlifter, one being the tether, you know, the constriction part, and one being the booster. That way, in the middle of battle, I can just hit a couple of buttons in order to get what I want. That would have to be a little bit different in terms of the Xbox One and PS4, but why not use the actual D-pad to be able to change those as opposed to switch the loadouts? See, that would allow you to stay in battle and allow you to get more creative in terms of using these items, because that's the game's biggest flaw. It wants you to be creative, but puts so many hurdles in your way in order to be creative. I specifically say creative because I feel like the game's direction is all to do with being creative with the tools in your arsenal, in particular with the tether. The thing is that the lack of explosives, the lack of the terrible buildings and things like that, that gives way for you to use something like, let's say, a regular windmill and try to create a blade of death that you can actually fly on. In fact, in the first couple of days in this game, you've seen some really interesting things that people have created, and some things that make you question whether or not a person is sane. But it is those moments that sort of defines the Just Cause series, those little GIFs on Reddit that everybody enjoys. The problem is that is a subset of players, a very subset of players. For the other players, yeah, they're going to want to do creative things at times, but they're also going to want to get into the action portion. And I feel like, again, you sort of make it really hard to get into that action portion. It feels like the game wants you to think about things, but at times doesn't really do a very good job, or even worse, gives you the wrong impression while trying to figure out what it wants from you. For example, this mission here, I have to shut down 3 specific terminals in order to be able to sort of liberate this base and be able to shut down its power. Now, I've gotten the first 2, but I can't find the last one. Now, note the boxing question via my AR mode. Notice how it is defined for this specific area in question. And that makes me think, oh, look in this area. And note the tunnel in particular. Note how it stops at the tunnel. In terms of, okay, it doesn't go into the tunnel, there is no green within the tunnel, so I'm thinking it's out here. It's in the tunnel. For some reason, they decided to stop the actual UI interface so that it would say that something could be within this area of the tunnel. And I don't know why. Is it something to do with environment collision? Maybe they weren't able to do that because it was underground. I don't know. But it caused me 15 of 20 minutes of time just to figure out that, hey, this isn't where the thing is, it's in that tunnel. And that drove me insane. Why is the game being so difficult in telling me basic information? The biggest baffling decision gameplay-wise has to do with, why is there such an emphasis on these stunts? A lot of the areas beyond the chaos that you caused, in order to unlock the area, you have to do these stunts. And I don't understand why there's so much emphasis on it this time. The things like the wingsuit portions, yeah, they aren't necessarily that hard to complete, but they're time consuming. Getting up to the biggest point in the mountain, the tallest point in the mountain, and jumping off and going through those points. Yeah, it's fun the first time, but the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, it starts to get very, very repetitive. And unfortunately, the game decides that things like going through a point like at 100 miles per hour, at 200 miles per hour, are worthy of the Just Cause name. It makes absolutely no sense. These are mundane tasks. I don't know why you replaced explosives with mundane tasks. I mean, did the team that did Just Cause 3 and 2 really think that the game needed this overhaul? I mean, there's more escort quests than ever, and while this game's escort quests aren't necessarily bad, they do bad for the game design as a whole. Again, this is about Rico going off and doing crazy things, exploding helicopters, taking helicopters and crashing them into other people. I mean, you don't want to be stuck to the ground trying to protect these people. And while there is a little bit of freedom, you do gotta actually protect them. Expanding on that, one of the things that I think Just Cause 4 does poorly is set itself up for success. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, let's talk about things like the quest design that I just talked about. See, in 2 and 3, it minimized certain elements in terms of the quest design. In particular, you didn't have as many escort quests. And of course, if you have more escort quests, you're going to notice more of the AI, especially the friendly AI. And well, as you can see here, the friendly AI has some problems at times. I mean, just go around. Just go around. Sometimes, though, other things happen, well, like this. How the hell did you get stuck in there? It takes too long to get to the newer content of the game, and the sad part is that really could have helped it. The one early mission where there was a tornado forming, yeah, that was actually really cool. Understanding what the wingsuit would do, what the parachute would do in terms of this tornado, and I was more interested at that point, even though the last couple of hours were a little bit of a drag. The game's pacing in terms of these missions, trying to push new elements on you, is a little bit too slow in my opinion. Now, granted, part of that has to do with the open world environment here. The fact is, you can go and do anything you want, but you set up this plot about them being able to control lightning, to control tornadoes. Why don't I see a little bit more of it when it comes to the gameplay? Maybe it will come later on, but to be perfectly honest, you haven't captured me up to this point, and so I may not continue on. It should be noted that I actually had to check if the developer was Avalanche Studios, because quite frankly, it doesn't really feel like their previous work. This feels like a developer who got the Just Cause franchise and understood some of the concepts about it and tried to put their own unique spin and sort of failed in the process. Now, I feel for the devs in this case. I know you want to move your franchise forward. You don't want to necessarily do the same thing over and over again. But the best comparison I can come up with in terms of Just Cause 4 is Saints Row 4. It just didn't do enough to intrigue me, and while the core of the series is still here, it's just lost. It doesn't understand what made the franchise so good, and its innovations are few and far between. The innovations here, however, are good. It's just that, well, you don't get to them in time. Yeah, the tornadoes and the lightning, that's going to be interesting later on, but it isn't worth trekking through this mud, this story, which doesn't really feel anything different than what we've seen before. And yes, I know, it's a Just Cause story, it's an overthrow of a dictator, you know the drill. But I wanted more Rico, I wanted a little bit more of his character, I wanted a little bit more personality from the game. In fact, this feels more toned back more than any other game in the franchise. And for a Just Cause series, doesn't make a lot of sense now, does it? If I had to score the game at this point with about 12 hours of gameplay put in, it's hard. I've gone back and forth between 68 and 72, and I'm gonna settle on a 70 out of 100. In my scoring system, that barely makes it as a sale title for most people, but for people who love the genre, yeah, it may be worth a purchase now. Now, with that said, this one's a hard one, because Just Cause 2 and 3 have so much content in it, and the fact of the matter is, those games blow Just Cause 4 out of the water with a little bit more finesse to it. Now, with that said, if you're wanting that much more and you just need a little bit of a push, this could help, but honestly, for most people, I don't see it. Also, these would be my enhancers if I was doing a full review. Now, again, I give this score to give you guys a buying guide for things, but on the other hand, I want to make sure you guys know this is about halfway through the game, at least from what I understand in terms of the length. So it doesn't take into account the final portion, it doesn't take into account the conclusion of the story, so on and so forth. Anyway, I am working on the review for Wandersong. I did want to get you guys some content, so therefore I put this video together because I got the review code for Square Enix. Anyway, working on Wandersong, still streaming Killer 7, and if you are confused about why Killer 7 videos are not showing up in the video feed anymore, the first video for anything I stream will show up in the feed, but from there will be a playlist, and that playlist will have unlisted videos of the past streams